to introduce the wonderful Per Bloland, who, in addition to his work on SPLICE's board and faculty, is an incredible composer whose music has been described by the New York Times as lush, caustic, and irresistible. I told Per earlier that that's maybe my favorite New York Times quote that I've heard in a composer bio in a long time. He has received all sorts of awards and recognitions from Seamus, ASCAP, IRCAM, estimable organizations. He's written for incredible groups like International Contemporary Ensemble, Thalia, performances by the Berkeley Symphony Orchestra, Guerrilla Opera, too many more cool ensembles to name, with work across chamber music, electroacoustic music, orchestral work, music for dance. So I am so delighted to hear about what Per is working on, and I hope you will all join me in welcoming him warmly.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about this device along with a bunch of sort of corollary projects that I'm working on. But I've been working with this thing for 20 years now, and that's a lot of history to encompass in an hour. I have probably way too many slides. I'm going to do my best. Some of them I'll just skip, I suppose. I don't know. There's no way I'm getting through it all. But I'm going to do my best, because I really want to get to the end, which is sort of a more musicological discussion than a technological one. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so the electromagnetically prepared piano and actuated actuated instruments at IRCAM. Great start. All right. So first I'm going to talk about the early years of the instrument, the mechanisms, play you some sounds from this thing. Raise your hand if you've actually seen this thing in action. I know some of you have, but probably not that many. Okay, so a few. A little bit about the history, and then we'll switch over to IRCAM mode and talk about the 2 residencies that I've had and what they resulted in, and then the current project that I'm involved in, which is also at IRCAM, called Orchestra of the Future, and that's where things get into the more musicological thing, which I'm really excited about. I've been dying to dive into the more esoteric side of this technological thing for years, and this is an opportunity. Okay, so let's get started. So the electromagnetically prepared piano is a device that I co-invented when I was a grad school at Stanford, and it has been through a number of iterations, but the basic premise is that you take a bunch of electromagnets and you suspend them over piano strings, and then you feed audio into those electromagnets, and they cause the strings to vibrate. So typically I work with 12 electromagnets. You can see the top, it's probably depth 12 on there, we could count them. And that means I need a 12-channel interface, and then I send out 12 discrete audio signals, 1 to each electromagnet, and you can make the piano make some really amazing sounds. So for example, if you have an F string, and you send at the frequency of F a sine tone at that frequency, the piano string will vibrate at that frequency, and it will sustain forever as long as you keep it going. And you can do that for each of the strings. So the simplest use of this is kind of like an EBow. You hit a string, the magnet turns on, the string, it crossfades from the attack of the hammer into the sustain of the sine tone. It's a pretty smooth transition. It's not a huge difference. And so you can get sustain forever. You could put a pedal, a volume pedal on there, so you could do a crescendo or control like a faster decrescendo. Although it wouldn't dampen the string necessarily. So that's like the bread and butter way to use this. But because you're sending in any audio signal that you want, you can do a lot more with it. So first of all, you can any partial is available up to like 20. So you can use like the F string to hit any of the overtones of the F string just by sending in the correct frequency as a sine tone. Sine tones are easy. They tend to be louder. But the great thing is that you're sending a sine tone into a string, and the string is going to respond as a string responds. So it doesn't sound, I mean, it's sinusoidal sort of, but it's still a piano, right? Like you can't get rid of the piano-ness of a string that's connected to a piano. Nor would you want to. Well, you might, I don't. So that means that you have the freedom to send really any sound in and just see what happens. You can gliss, And as you, like if you send a sine sweep into a string, it will, like let's say you start at the fundamental and then you sweep up to the 10th partial. You will hear the fundamental get loud and then quiet, and then you'll hear a very quiet sweep of like all the frequencies in between. And then when it gets to the second partial, it'll get loud and then quiet again, and then more sweeping, and then the third partial. So you hear like a whoa, whoa, whoa. I can't do it, but you know what I mean. And it's a really beautiful sound. It's an interesting, like in itself. So sine tones are great, but you can send anything. I mean, one of the sort of fun tricks is to send a recording of someone speaking into all 12 electromagnets, and each string that the electromagnet is over will have its set of partials that it can respond, by which it responds, and the combination of all those gives you a very distinct sound of someone talking. So an acoustic piano, the sound of someone talking is coming out of it. You can't necessarily understand it because all the overtones are there, and the sustain, each one sustains longer than, you know, it smears everything. So not great for communication, but it sounds cool. So briefly, I will explain a little bit about the mechanism. It's pretty simple, but it turns out that the physics are very complicated because it's electromagnets, and magnetism is just a complex beast, and there are things about it that I don't know that we fully understand in this system. So you can see here, the electromagnets are suspended very close to the string, and it's like a speaker. You know, you have an electromagnet, and the electromagnet, the polarity of the you send an audio signal in, and the polarity of that electromagnet switches back and forth. It goes up and down, just like the waveform. When you have a cone around that electromagnet with permanent magnets attached to it, then that cone moves out and back and out and back, and it moves the air hits our ears, and we hear sound. Without the cone, you have something that's more like, you know, those headphones you put on, and they rest against your skull, and they vibrate your skull. So that's transducing your skull, and you end up hearing the audio, and it works pretty well. But if you just take the electromagnet and you put it over a string, when the polarity is positive, it will pull on the string. And when the polarity is negative, it will also pull on the string, right? If you have a magnet, like a regular old magnet, and you put it on the fridge, it'll stick, and then if you flip it, it'll still stick, right? But if you take two magnets, then they will either repel or attract. So the first issue that you run into with this system is that you want the string to go up, and then you want it to be pushed away. You want it to be pulled and pushed. So magnets and metal don't work that way. You can't do that. You can only pull and pull and pull. So you can see here, there are little black permanent magnets glued to the electromagnets. I think what intuitively makes sense is that the permanent magnets are turning the strings locally into magnets, right? So it just magnetizes the string, and then when the polarity goes up, the string gets pulled. When the polarity goes down, it gets pushed away. There's some argument about what's actually going on, and this is one of the things that is like this physics question is still open. Okay, so that's the overview of the mechanism that behind this, but it's dead simple. We have an electromagnet. It's connected to an amplifier, 12 different amplifiers. Those are all fed by an interface that's connected to a computer, and that's it. So that's nice to have it be that simple. But you can see here, this is all custom-made suspension system. And the reason that this is needs to be so precisely machined is that the magnetic field is pretty weak, right? These are not big electromagnets. You could get honking giant electromagnets that would do much more, but they're wide, and we want this to be local to a specific course of strings, typically the three strings that make a pitch. So because they're so weak, they have to be very close, and the closer they get, the louder it gets, which means, of course, that the string is displacing more. The louder the string, the greater the displacement, the louder the string. So as you're moving it closer, it's getting louder and louder, all of a sudden it starts hitting the electromagnet. And that actually makes a really cool sound, but it's not always what you want, right? You want to be able to do that when you want and not when you don't want. So, so you end up adjusting the height of the electromagnets very precisely, and that's what these little cantilever is for. There's a little dial on there that just like, you can inch it, not inch it, you can like micron it down very, very, very precisely. Okay, so I think I'll just ask if there, because that's like the mechanism. Does anyone have any questions about how it works? Yeah?
How did you arrive at this design if it's not clear how it works? Just pure experimentation?
I mean, it's the same as an EBO.
Okay.
Like, there's precedent. An EBO, just as an aside, if you've used an EBO before, you know what it is. You put them on a guitar, you switch it on, and then you pluck a string, and it reinforces that frequency. And then when you move your, when you change your finger on the fret, that frequency, it changes frequency too. So that's a feedback system. There's a sensor and an actuator in the EBO. It's determining, like when you just put it on, it doesn't do anything because it hasn't been activated by sound going into it. You pluck a string, and well, that's not always true. Sometimes there's a little, it comes alive anyway. But regardless, you pluck a string, the actuator detects the, picks up the signal and then sends it back into the string, and so reinforces that. That way, when you move the fret, it changes pitch. These don't have that. Well, they can. I'll get to that later. But yeah. So there. What was the question? I lost the thread.
How you had designed it if it wasn't clear how it worked.
Oh, right. Okay. So so the EBO was the precedent. We actually bought an EBO and cracked it open so we could learn about how it actually worked, the feedback system. And then I worked with two engineers that understand this stuff way better than me. But there's still some physics. We understand it enough to make it work, but some of the physics need further investigation and are getting them currently, but I'll get to that later. Yeah?
So which 12 strings is it over?
Any.
Okay, so you can just pick whatever 12 strings you
That's a
want.
compositional choice. And you can see there's little, these things, this is a track, so they slide along the track. And they're thin enough, for the most part, to be minor seconds. Like, it could be, if you have 10 of them all on minor seconds, it gets a little tricky, but it's not impossible. So
you duplicate pitches, or it's all different pitches?
So you can put whatever you want in. It depends on the piece, right? I compose the input along with the piece. And so first, I'll get to a little bit of the composition stuff, but one of the first compositional decisions is which strings these are going to be over, and then what am I going to send in? But that changes. There's a max patch that's always associated with this thing, and there's a pedal, so you go through scenes and excite different strings and stuff like that. So here is just a diagram of the flux pattern, and you can see that. So this is part of the thing that we don't understand fully. The permanent magnets are probably focusing the flux and making it louder, as well as magnetizing the string. I guess we do understand that that's happening, but the main things that we don't understand are the size. You've got radius, you've got length, you've got distance, you've got the thickness of the string, the density of the string, the tension of the string. All these things change over the course of the piano. Different electromagnets are different sizes. We experiment with different sizes, and there's the number of windings and the gauge of the windings and all this stuff. And we're trying to optimize this to get the most volume, and it's hard to know exactly what, people will talk about how you get stronger, we know how to make stronger electromagnets, but we don't, there's not a lot of work being done on the best electromagnet for a given string, right? For a given piano string. That's kind of a niche question. It doesn't come up for most engineers. So it's things like that. All right, here's a very simple, like I said, laptop, interface, amplifier, electromagnets. Boom. Okay, so I thought I'd just play you some sounds so you can get a sense for what this thing does. The first piece I ever composed for it, back in 2006, was for solo piano with electromagnets. And the performer has a pedal, you just move through cues. There was some stuff that I was triggering manually. We had a disc clavier at Karma, which was great, so I set it up to, so the patch would know when the individual keys were hit. turns out you can't count on a disc clavier being in a concert space. So I had to set it up so I would like follow along with the score and hit the key and do all that kind of stuff. Anyway, here's the beginning of the piece, which is just electromagnets. And keep in mind, this is strictly acoustic. Everything you're hearing is acoustic sounds. It's coming from the vibrating strings of a piano with no amplification. Yes. Actual piano. All right. So one of the problems with the setup there, I quickly realized, is that it is a max patch and it's autonomous. There are, I don't know, 15 scenes or whatever, but there's no. There are two performers. One is the human at the piano, and the other is the max patch controlling the strings. And they're obviously playing the same instrument, and there can be some interaction. But in this piece, it's mostly a background. Like the stuff goes on in the background, and the player plays over it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it seemed like a wasted opportunity, right? You've got these great sounds coming out of an acoustic instrument, and you've got a human playing the acoustic instrument. I wanted to integrate those two things more fully. So I came up with a different system. And that's, oh, I guess I already had that. We'll go back to here. So that system, I guess this was the third piece that I wrote for it. The electromagnets, there's maybe, what is it, 6 or 8 electromagnets that are always on. And so they're vibrating the strings the whole time. And the performer, for the most part, the responsibility is to dampen those strings. So when there's a note in the score, the way to play the note is to lift your finger up and just allow the string to vibrate. And so I came up, you can't use normal notation for that because the string could be at any of its overtones. So the performer won't know what pitch to expect when you can't like say D and then know which finger to lift, right? D could be under multiple strings. So I had to use tablature, basically, a kind of tablature for that. But I think it worked pretty well. I'll play an example. So just a couple other things. This is for alto saxophone and piano, and there's also a piece of paper on the strings. So there's like a kind of fluttery vibrational thing that you'll hear. There's also some regular notes, but there's a chain on the top notes, so you hear that there. Okay, so let's check this out. There's the paper. plays in the Hinge ensemble, Hinge Quartet. They changed their name. And then John Aylward is he runs the Etche ensemble, and he was the piano player. Okay, so one thing that is that pops up here. Let me see if I can find the picture. Is the electromagnets on this system look a little different than here it is. Maybe can you see it? Not really. But they have heat sinks around the electromagnets. So these electromagnets are a little smaller than the ones I use now, but they get really hot and they melt, which is not great. So electromagnets are coils. You got a steel core and then a wire wrapped around the core, and then that's enclosed in a case. Luckily, the case is not the thing that melts, so it's not like it spills out onto the strings. That would be really devastating. But the coil melts, and sometimes it melts all at once, in which case there's a big puff of smoke and it smells bad. And sometimes it melts gradually, in which case they just degrade. But I have been running one when it melted dramatically, and I'm so bummed I didn't record it. It's like this scream that comes out of the piano. It sounded amazing. But each one costs like $35, so you know. And if I could try to reproduce it a few times and never get it, and be like hundreds of dollars in the hole. So anyway, temperature is a big problem. And though you have all kinds of systems, the heat sinks, we've got other systems like, I have a thermometer that you touch on, it's like a food thermometer, I think you touch on the thing so I can constantly monitor the, anyway, it's a hassle. All right, so, let's continue. Nope. Okay, so here's what I wanted to get to at the end. I'm just gonna pose the question right now, so you can think about it and we'll see if we get to it. But, so this is something the local question is something I struggled with quite a bit at the beginning. And the reason that I struggled with it so much is that, let's say you're in a concert hall and you see someone playing the piano and you hear these amazing sounds, and this happened all the time, and there are speakers there because I'm not the only electroacoustic person on the show. And then, somebody comes up and be like, oh, that's amazing. What is it? I'm like, oh, it's an acoustic instrument. And they're like, oh, yeah, so you sometimes run it acoustically? I'm like, yeah, I just did. And they're like, yeah, but then what was coming out of the speakers? I'm like, nothing. And they're like, oh, okay. So when you do run it acoustically, I'm like, no. There's nothing. That's it. And it just doesn't compute. So if people are assuming that it's coming out of speakers anyway, why don't I just record these sounds and play them out of speakers, right? So they sound cool. Like, the sounds are nice. I like the sounds. But it's not just that. There's something else about this. And then when people are in a room with the piano and it's making these sounds and they're right in front of it, it's just different. Like, it's a thing. And so what is that thing, right? Like, why is this worth doing? It takes me 2 hours to set up. I rarely get 2 hours in a concert hall before a performance. Nobody can practice the piece unless I'm there. They can practice it on their own and it'll be fine. But the second piece where you have to lift your fingers up, you can't practice that without the electromagnets. They're really hard to set up. I can't ship them to someone and expect them to do anything. So, it's a drag. It's a real pain in the ass. So why? Why do I do this, right? And it's because of the reaction it gets. It's amazing. People freak out. So it's hard to convey that kind of thing, so that's the second prompt. You have to imagine that you're in a room. There's a grand 9-foot grand Steinway D, and it's vibrating, it's shaking, and all these sounds are coming out, and you're there, and you're hearing and seeing and all that stuff. So you have to kind of imagine that, and think about what it is that's different. So one of the things that is definitely, clearly scientifically different is that speakers have a very distinct radiation pattern. They're directional, they point at you, they flatten the sounds in certain ways. Instruments don't do that. They radiate in a globe for the most part, not perfectly, but the sound bounces in different ways, it reflects off the walls, there's a different sonic, you can hear it, right? There's something about it that you can hear. I don't, is it live or Memorex? I don't know, who knows, but it's something. So, so that's about the the instrument, but then I'm gonna be talking about other instruments that are similarly equipped in various ways. And then the question becomes like, why do that at all? And I do think that there is something, and I've been trying to write some stuff about it, and I've got some ideas. We talked a little bit about it in aesthetics when we were talking about actuated instruments. So I hope we have time to do that. I think we actually might. Okay, I'll press on. So very quick version of the history. Grad student at Stanford. I played the trumpet. I used to play in practice rooms where there were pianos. The top, however, octave of the piano is never damped, so you play the trumpet and you hear the strings vibrate, and it's all pretty and tinkly tinkly. So then I started playing the trumpet while holding down the pedal, and I got some cool sounds from that. So I was having lunch with this guy right here, Steve Backer, and I was like, what can we do to make that more controllable? Like, can we put a bunch of speakers, like 88 speakers, like tiny little speakers along each string? He thought that was a bad idea. And then, what about electromagnets? And he was like, that's what we're going to do. So he got Ed Berdahl has done a lot of stuff with this kind of thing, and gone on to do some amazing things. So these two guys started working on it, and they wrote this paper, If I Had a Hammer, Design and Theory of that. And then I wrote this other paper about composing for it and some of the compositional implications. Ooh, fancy. So that's the first version. That's what it looked like. I went to Lowe's and I got one of those closet tracks and attached these brackets, and we had really long bolts. And so anytime you wanted to adjust the height, you had to unscrew the top and then screw the bottom, and then unscrew the top and then screw the bottom, and that was awful. Then we have this thing called the Miami University Instrumentation Lab. They make not instruments, but instruments in the scientific sense, like centrifuges and like whatever. You need to have a certain lamp on plants for 6 months, and it has to have the exact right wattage and can't fail or whatever. So they make stuff. So they designed this new system, which is, here's the cantilever right there. And I can't even tell you how many hours and how much back pain that change has saved me. Okay, so that's the second version. All right, now we're into the ear cam stuff. So I decided I wanted to apply for an artistic research residency at EarCam, and I was like, maybe I'll do the electromagnetic piano. I had some other ideas, but I ended up doing that, and they accepted it. And it turned out they have a team there that does augmented instruments, actuated instruments, and so it was kind of perfect. But the actual proposal was to kind of work on the physics a little bit. I worked with a physicist, Joël Bensoam there, and build that interaction into their physical modeling software called Modalese. And so in Modalese, you build a string and you build a hammer, and then you connect the two so that when the hammer is moved, it hits the string, and then you hear the results, right? You can build an entire piano. You can build a surface, like a wooden surface, and then you can put a bridge on it, and then another bridge, or I guess it would be an anchor, and then you attach the string to that. Like it gets really complicated. You have to do everything by hand, but it's also really cool. But one thing they didn't have was the effect of an electromagnet on a string. So we built that in. It's called the induction connection, and it's kind of broken now. There's certain parts of it that don't work. We're going to fix that over hopefully soon. But this is the documentation for that. So that was 5 months in EarCam. And the great thing about that was I got to meet all the EarCam people. So, here, before we move on to that, this is that piece that I wrote for Keith that I mentioned at some point. This uses the Modalese induction connection. So this is the sound, this is the physical model of the electromagnet in practice. I also put a lot of distortion on it, so it's not like a pure signal, but at least it gives you some idea. So that was 2 strings being actuated, virtually actuated. But you could hear that gliss at the beginning. Did you go hear the gliss at the beginning? I'll play it just the beginning, just right at the beginning. so you can hear, that's a fast splice, so it goes me, 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 me. Like, you hear the partials popping out as it goes down. But it's also distorted, it's a little harder to hear. I'm gonna skip the second one in the interest of time. Here's another one that just sounds cool. It's two string, the same two pitch. I think it's the minor second apart. And they kind of, I use noise to activate those. So I'm sending in filtered noise. So it's got a, it's through a bandpass. And because it's noise, the sound doesn't just go ooh. It's like ooh. And then of course distortion. So here's another. So I personally think everything sounds better with distortion, but that's my predilection. But there's just something about the quality of it. It sounds much more alive and natural than some of the, some other methods of synthesis. All right, so because of that first residency, I was introduced to, the physicist met these two people. He works at EarCam and he's a composer. And we connected us, and now he's got started this whole other project called CAP. This acronym is really a stretch. But Capsicum has a nice ring, right? The Capsicum project, yeah.
Do you remember what SPLICE stands for?
No! Nobody does. It stands for Splice. So we started this project. And we had this whole consortium of people working in other universities, and then the opportunity to apply for another research residency popped up, and Henri was one of the judges on that, so it was like, come on in. It was great. So we started it. That was a 2-year residency, but it was only like days here and there as we could see fit. But that one ended. But that was specifically about active control. So now I'm going to talk briefly about active control. Does anyone know what active control is? Has anybody ever heard this term and applied? Okay, it's a really interesting method of synthesis. It didn't start with synthesis. It started with, I think, large projects that needed stabilization of structures. So if you've got a building and it's windy, and the wind hits a certain frequency, the building will start to sway, right? And that's bad. You don't want that to happen. So I don't know the full scope of this, but if you have a building that's swaying at a particular frequency, theoretically you can phase cancel that sway, right? You just need a big actuator to push when the building is pulling and pull when the building is pushed. So essentially, you put a sensor on the wall that detects which way it's moving and how fast, and then you have a very slow waveform that comes out of that. You send that into the actuator and you flip the phase, and you can stop it from shaking, right? So bridges that if you've seen that video of the bridge collapsing in the wind, theoretically, active control can dampen that kind of thing. So what that means is it's a feedback system. You have a sensor, and you have an actuator, and you take the which is what an EBO is, right? I don't know if it's technically active control. There's a few other things involved, but you take the signal from the sensor, you run it through some stuff, and then you send it back into the actuator, and it creates a loop, but it's a modified loop. The EBO is not a modified loop; it is just a stable loop. Although I guess the EBO has an octave leap, right? You can jump it up an octave, so that's one intervention. But the cool thing is, theoretically, and we're still working on this, you can take a filter and move the frequency a little bit, and you can bend the pitch of a piano. You can bend the pitch of any partial. You can isolate the partial that you want to bend, and so if you've got an F, let's do a C. I can do the overtone series faster. If you've got a C, and you want to bend the pitch of the third partial, the G, then you tune your filter to that G, and when you hit the string, that'll start the feedback loop, and you will hear the G, which is, you know, an octave and a fifth above the fundamental. Everything else will decay, but you'll still hear that G. So that's like without any intervention. But then you can start bending the G up or down, and so it's potentially you can sort of get this prepared piano sound without touching the strings. You theoretically could bend the fundamental, but the lower, each partial is more stable. The higher the partial are, the less stable they are. So the fundamental is very stable. It requires a tremendous amount of energy to move it. The higher partials are much easier to nudge around. And that's a big problem. These magnets are not that powerful. And if you really want to do it right, you have to find something that's stronger, exerts more power on the string than the hammer, which hits it. And that's a lot of power, right? So the hammer hits the string, you just hear the string. And then as that excitation dies, then you hear the active control part. But here's an example of that. You can see here, we've got one electromagnet here. So the great thing about these, they act as sensors and actuators. So we can just use the same things. So we've got one on the far side, my cursor seems, one on the far side here and one on the near side here. This is the sensor, this is the actuator, and then there's a max patch that sends it back through. One thing about active control, the latency has to be like 0, and that's very hard to do in a max patch, it's impossible to do in a max patch. But we use something called a D-space, that is a one sample delay thing. There's an interface, but they cost like $10,000, so we can't really, you can't borrow it. So anyway, that's another active thing, is trying to figure out how to get the latency down. Yeah, so here, check this out. So it just died on its own. Or did I let the key up? No. So I think what's going on there is that it's detuning some of the strings and not others. So you get that beating pattern. And that's, you know, why it picks some strings and not others of those, you know, the three of the same pitch. Who knows? Here's another example that's very detuned, and you'll see you'll see that there's an electromagnet on a particular pitch, and then you'll see me hit a different key than that pitch, and that matches, you know, like it's detuned down a whole step. So when I hit the key a whole step below, you'll hear it'll match. Yeah, sorry.
So in this case, Max is only like kind of reacting to what you're doing.
It's
not adding anything.
It's just creating a feedback loop. It's reading, the sound of the string is getting picked up by the first electromagnet, which is just a guitar pickup, essentially. Going into Max is pushing it around and sending it back out to the other electromagnet, which is the actuator. So the only difference in the electromagnets is whether they're plugged into the input or the output of the interface. They don't care which way the signal goes. All right, so here's another one. And you can see that nice and loud. Oh, there's a big detune. It's not quite there, but it's almost there. So that's, you know, it's almost a whole step. All right, so that's what we're working on for the Capsicum project. But then another project came along called Orchestra of the Future. So there's a new director of artistic research, relatively new, at IRCAM, and he created these, what he's calling hybrid research groups. And I think I mentioned this in the AI thing, because we're group number 2. Group number 1 is AI and music, and so I talked a little bit about what they're working on. That's really cool stuff. I'm super excited to hear what they end up with. We meet at the same, like when the groups meet, we all meet kind of at the same time, but they always start one like block before us, so I can always go to one of their meetings and like write down everything they're doing, and then I have to go to my own and I never learn anything more. Okay, so Orchestra of the Future. We were just given this as a prompt, and it was very vague, but there was a bunch of people who were working on augmented instruments who were in the group, so we kind of, that's the direction that we sort of went, but we're also looking at actual orchestral studies in the future and what that will mean. So here's the list of names. You can see it's a pretty big group, and Henri and Richard were the two people from the Capsicum, so they're involved. And then there's Orlaine Mamar, which I haven't mentioned this. The EarCam, so Henri is part of a team that works on this kind of thing, the electromagnets, using basically actuated instruments and a bunch of other things. But they're very interested in this area. And so when we were running into problems, trying to figure out exactly how the physics of this thing worked, we realized we needed someone to really look into it. So he applied for funding for a graduate student, and now we have Orlan as a PhD student just studying this, how to optimize active control using electromagnets on piano strings, which is amazing. I mean, to have like a dedicated researcher working on this stuff, only this, it's great. So it's only been a few months, so really looking forward to what comes out of that. So yeah, some of these people are composers, some of them are performers, and some of them are researchers, and some of them are all three or some hybrid combination, whatever. All right, so this is just a diagram of active control. You've got the sensor and the actuator, and then you're messing with it in between. That's the basic idea. So these are the three areas that we're looking at: augmented, actuated flute. This one was already there, and actuated guitar. So the actuated flute is really cool. I don't know if it's going to work, but yeah. So if you're a flute player, you know that in the head there's like a, what's that thing called?
The cork system.
Yeah. So you've got a, if you picture a flute head, there's the rounded end, but there's a thing that blocks it off, right? So if you stick your finger in, you can't touch the end because there's a cork. Is it cork?
Yeah, there's a cork.
Does it have metal on?
Yeah, it's a metal plate with a center, with a pin in the center, and a cork around it, and another metal plate, and the crown seals it.
Okay. So this is perfect, right? How perfect is this? You can take that, you can theoretically, open up the end, and then hook up an electromagnet or a solenoid of some kind, and then have this little plate that's already in there vibrate. I mean, it takes a little, it's harder than this, but it can vibrate at the audio rate, theoretically, right? So then you've got your air column, and you're sending in a signal that's vibrating, that's squeezing the air column, like applying audio rate pressure to the air column, and so you can mess with it, right? Like you can theoretically, like if you're playing an F and it's all of a sudden you've got the F and it's vibrating an F, it would probably, I hope, get louder. I don't know. We don't know exactly how this is going to work. But then if you start bending it, you've still got the F fingered, but then you've got this thing vibrating at F sharp, right? So what's that going to do? I don't know. This doesn't exist yet, but I want it to so badly. So that's cool. So that's an example of an air column actuation, right? There's all these. So like you can actuate a string. Basically, the only way to do that is with an electromagnet because you can't touch the string. You can actuate a soundboard. And for that, you can use sound exciters, which are these little things. They're cheap and they're cool. I highly recommend you mess around with them. Some of you may have seen them. They've lots of them. And then you can actuate an air column. So the flute is one way to do that. Other experiments have been done with trumpet and trombone, where you take a mute and put a speaker on it, and then as you push the speaker into the bell of the instrument, you're interfering with the sound coming out. On wind instruments, they've experimented with drilling a little hole in the what do you call it? On a clarinet, you got the mouthpiece and the body, and then the little thing.
Barrel.
Yeah, the barrel, or somewhere around there. It could be on the mouthpiece too. And you put a tiny speaker in there, and you inject sound that way. So basically just interfering with the air column. with an actuator. So these are all examples of actuated instruments. And I guess I will briefly make a distinction between an actuated instrument and an augmented instrument. The term augmented instrument is huge. You know, putting reverb on a violin could be an augmented instrument, right? This is probably a little too broad, but actuated instruments are ones that are specifically, the vibrating body is disrupted by an actuator in some way, which is probably a subset, but I'm sure there are cases that are outside that. And then finally we have the guitar, and the guitar can be actuated in two ways. One is with an electromagnet, and the other is on the soundboard with one of those sound exciters. You could do them both. The other thing about this, the Catalin Codolai is the guitarist in the group, and she has developed this entirely separate system called the open fret system, and she has these little magnets that you can move around. So it's like a capo that is instantly and completely customizable. So she'll play, and then she'll move the thing, and then it'll be in a different tuning, and then she'll move it again in a different tuning. It's really cool. But here you can see this is what's this called? Hexaphonic electromagnetic pickups. So this allows you to detect the pitch, capture the pitch of each string independently, and send out 6 channels, 1 for each string. So if you want to actuate a string, only one string at a certain pitch, you have to know, well, I guess you don't have to know, but if you want to do it with any kind of feedback, you have to know, you have to capture, it has to be isolated, right? And then here, this is a sound exciter. So this is a little physical vibrator that vibrates the surface of this, of the soundboard. And so you send a sound into there. So you can imagine, like, theoretically, you could run the sound of the E string into the soundboard, and then when you pluck it, the E string would vibrate forever, but none of the other strings would. Although that's a bad example, because it might catch the other E string, but you know what I mean. All right, so that's now she's got two exciters on there, and this is the studio at Earcam, and I have a recording of, and here she is with those same electromagnets on the electric guitar. These sound great. The problem is we need a bridge. We need something to hold the electromagnets in place, right? With the sound exciters, you can just glue them on or whatever. You can fasten them. It's not that hard. But the electromagnets need a mounting system. So I don't know. 3D printing is not that hard. We'll probably figure that out. So here are some examples of. This is somebody else playing an electric guitar with these little permanent magnets attached to it and some sort of feedback system using.
En fait, c'est un peu l'équivalent d'avoir une corde super épaisse. Tu l'alourdis, et tu changes sa fréquence de résonance. J'imagine que c'est ça que ça fait, principalement.
En fait, l'interaction des deux fait que ça dégage des fréquences plus graves, plus élevées.
So that is a sustainiac. Has anybody ever heard of a sustainiac? Yeah. So those are actuators, not pickups. So you're vibrating the strings using the sustainiac. But I think you don't have individual string control on that, right? No? Okay. So you send, it's probably a feedback system, right? You're just picking up, you're going straight from this pickup to this actuator. But you can imagine guitarists love it because you can get infinite sustain, and if you're just holding one string, you don't have to worry about the other strings vibrating because you're damping them with your hands. So let's see, I guess we'll skip ahead to the next one, running out of time. So here again, okay, so here's an example of using the hexaphonic pickup system and running the output of each string into a volume pedal and then back into the actuators on the system. So she can control the sustain of each string with the pedal. you know, kid in a candy store, right? And then that's the master volume. All right. Oh, this is the last slide. Look at that. I can't believe I made it. It's time for some questions. Okay, so back to the fundamental question. Well, let's see. Is that the last? Yeah, it is. Okay, good. So this is not actually the fundamental question, but this is we talked about this a little bit in aesthetics too. You've got these instruments, and I mean this kind of goes for a lot of electronic instruments in general. If you want them to be adopted, how do you get them? How do you turn these things into actual sustainable instruments? And you may not want to, right? I mean, not everything that's invented needs to last forever, but some should, right? And if you want to do that, and especially if you've got like a really amazing flute system, like let's go with the flute. You've got this head joint that is easily like you can manufacture, right? But what do you do with it? You're gonna have to. There has to be some signal that goes into it, right? So if you're a flute player, you're not gonna program Max. I mean, unless you're here, you're not gonna program Max to like send. Yeah, exactly. To send sound into this thing. So how do we make and how can you like manufacture something that people can use and will use? And if you imagine an orchestral player, right? This is Orchestra of the Future. That's our project. So if you want to, like in Paris, there are orchestras that will do this. But in the US, can you imagine going to like the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and being like, will you play this thing and just, you know, check it out? They'd be like, I don't have time for that. I can't use it in Beethoven. So there has to be some, you know, it has to be what were the three things? It has to be sustainable, like reproducible. I guess those are two things. Sustainable, reproducible, and there was a third one. I can't remember what it was. So these are the problems. They're difficult to control. This is a huge one. There needs to be, you know, you've got all of the sounds that are physically possible to create at your disposal. What do you send into the flute to make it sound good, right? So I think that's a pretty good use for AI, actually. And especially here's my thing. If you're in the Orchidea class, you'll recognize this. If you have a flute, and you have a sensor on the flute that's, you know, connected to your computer, and then you have an actuator in there that's receiving something from the computer, and you tell the computer, you have an AI agent on the computer, and you say, I want the flute to sound like a truck driving by. And so it's going to first it'll send the sound of a truck into the actuator, right? But then you've got the flute, and the flute is filtering all these sounds, and you're not going to get the sound of a truck driving by. So then the AI agent will start messing with it and see if it can get closer to the target sound. And maybe it can, maybe it can't, but it's going to listen to its output, it's going to try something, doesn't work, go back to another thing, try something else. Like, I don't know how this is going to work. So it has to be a real-time AI agent, and it has to be one that, well, it has to be able to respond in almost zero latency, right? So already we're in the realm of impossibility. And I guess that's it. It has to be able to do those things. It has to be smart enough to recognize when these things are getting closer together. But man, wouldn't that be cool if you could like have the AI, you know, you just like send it a sound, and you could put a mic on the violin, and then that would be the stream of sound coming into the AI, and then the flute player would be a hybrid flute violin sound coming out of the flute. Who knows what that would sound like? But it would not sound like a flute. It would not sound like a violin. It would be something different. So that's what I want. Okay, I'm going to stop. We didn't really get to the last question, but I asked it before, and so I feel like that's good enough. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
I've been waiting for a long time.
Yeah.
Two questions actually.
Yeah.
First, do you ever wish to control the horizontal and vertical position of the actuators on the piano using a servo system or something?
That would be awesome, yes. And I'll tell you, so there's a whole aspect to this that I didn't touch on, but when you've got a vibrating string, right, and you've got an actuator vibrating that string, first of all, there are nodes. Every string has a place where like the third partial is not going to move here, right? So if you put the electromagnet in that place and you ask for the third partial, you'll get absolutely nothing. So then you got to move it. That's a pain. But the other thing is there is a sweet spot, and I don't really know where that is. When it's right in the middle, it's really easy to get it loud, but you have to pull it really far away because that's maximum displacement, right? So then it gets quiet again. So it's like super loud for a second, and then it starts hitting, and then you move it away, and then it's really quiet. So then you put it all the way on the nut, and it's quiet, but it's never going to hit, right? So you move it, you just keep moving it further in until you get it as loud as possible, but then it starts hitting, and you have to move it. Like, it's a nightmare. It's a pain. So yes, robo servers would be awesome for that. We didn't talk at all about the horizontal displacement. I mean, pianos are insanely complicated. There's this double decay system. You've got I'm not going to explain it all, but very quickly energy dissipates into the piano from the string vibrating. If it dissipates quickly, you get a lot of volume because it's translated. The louder it is, the more the soundboard steals energy from the string. So you want it to be loud, but then it goes away quickly. So the double decay system means that you've got the two modes. I said I wasn't going to explain it. Here I am. You've got the two modes of vibration. The horizontal mode of vibration translates to the bridge really fast, and it gets really loud and dies away really quickly. But the horizontal mode of vibration translates much less to the bridge. So you get a decay that goes like this, but then there's another one that goes like this. So the result is like this, and we perceive that just because it's loud at the beginning. We perceive that as loud, and obviously we perceive it as long because it is long. So it's a cool system, but it makes using electromagnets complicated because they're vibrating like this. Like we're exerting this control. Why are they going like this? They shouldn't. There's lots of reasons why, but anyway.
And actually, you referenced the other question in 1C. I mean, it must mess with the instincts of the performers when you're augmenting an instrument like that.
Yeah.
How do you account for that in your composition?
Well, the piano, it's not so much, right? You're just playing the keys. I mean, unless I'm asking you to stick your fingers in, and then they just have to practice doing that. There's no way around that. But the piano keys don't change much no matter what you do to the strings. The flute, though, I mean, I don't know what that would be like to play, or the clarinet or the trumpet. Like the back pressure is such an important part. If you're changing that, if you're playing, I mean, it's like when you wear headphones and you listen to yourself singing an E and you try to sing an F at the same time. Like that's almost impossible to do, right? It's just hard. So what if you're trying to play an F and the flute's playing a G? Then you're gonna bend down, and then you're gonna be constantly bending around. It's never gonna. I don't know.
Well, you're saying with the guitar, it just seemed to me that it had like you were intervening in the interface in a more, I don't know, in a more intrusive way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what kind of feedback have you gotten from the performer in terms of
She loves it.
playability?
I mean, this is her thing, though.
Okay, got it.
It doesn't, the actuation doesn't change the feel of the guitar that much. I don't think. But there's lots of circumstances where it could, if you're really going crazy on the string. So yeah, I'm TBD. I'll let you know. All right, we're out of time, I think.
That's all. Give care.